Ah, my dear friends, let me take you to the depths of time, to a land in the golden age of a great empire. Now, from where you are sitting, close your eyes and imagine a world state stretching from east to west, victory squares echoing with thundering cannons, intrigues whispering in the majestic corridors of palaces, a civilization shining at the heights of art and science, and at the head of this mighty empire a name that ruled both east and west, Solomon. But we don't just call him Suleiman, he is Suleiman the Magnificent, the symbol of justice, the protector of the arts, the one who led an empire into a golden age. Today, as we gather around this fire, I will not just tell you the story of a sultan. No, this is not just the story of a man, but of a world shaped under his leadership. To understand Suleiman is to understand the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, its world-changing policies, its cultural riches, and even the deep secrets of his private life. His era is like a stage on which not only victories, but also loves, betrayals, great dreams, and empires were born and sunk. The story of Suleiman the Magnificent begins with his accession to the throne, but its roots go much deeper. Behind this journey of glory lie the paths paved by his grandfathers, the dark plans of his enemies, and the loyal bonds forged by his friends. It is the responsibility a ruler feels as a young prince that makes him the leader he later becomes, a man of justice. But my friends, Solomon became such a great ruler not only because of the sharpness of his sword, but also because of his intelligence and wisdom. From the moment he first shouldered the weight of the throne, the Ottoman throne became the talk of the world, not just in Istanbul. This is not just a story of ascension to the throne. It is a story of struggles between civilizations, of conquests that opened up new horizons, and of the perfect order of one man's dream. Solomon's story is not only the clash of East and West, but also the search for peace and balance in the midst of that clash. Today we will talk about the world order he built with his justice, the palace he shaped with his loves, the lands he won with his victories, and the lessons he learned with his losses. But first, let me invite you to ponder with a question. How did such a mighty ruler leave his mark not only on Ottoman history, but also on world history? And was this period we call his golden age really only full of victories? Or were there unseen storms as well? Get ready, my friends, because this journey is just beginning. My friends, I now take you to one of the most critical moments of the Ottoman Empire. When the calendar turned to 1520, the Ottoman throne was about to once again rest on the shoulders of a giant ruler. This time, however, the new occupant of the throne would not only be an emperor, but also a symbol of an era. It was Suleiman, still young, but dazzling with his intellect, his justice, and his perseverance, who years later would earn the title of Kanuni. Yavuz Sultan Selim, with his fierce temperament and conquests, had expanded the borders of the Ottoman Empire like never before and made the state a world power. But with every great ruler comes a question mark for his successors. Who will inherit this legacy? Suleiman came on the scene as the answer to this question. Suleiman, then serving in the Sanjak of Saurihen, was only 30 years old when he received the news of his father's death. The messengers from the palace brought him not only news of his death, but also a responsibility that would shape the future of the empire. Suleiman took a deep breath and said, "From now on, this great empire on earth will be shaped in my hands," and set off for Istanbul. When he arrived in Istanbul, not only the throne room, but also a great unknown awaited him. The words whispered on the walls of the palace were enough for him to understand the weight of the throne. Suleiman had to step out of his father's shadow and write his own story. In his first days on the throne, Suleiman acted with quiet but impressive determination. He wanted to send a message to the Ottoman people. "Yes, I follow a ruler like Yavuz, but with my justice, this state will grow not only by the sword, but also by the mind." And my dear friends, as soon as Suleiman ascended the throne, he took steps to show this. His first order of business was to take a deep look at the state. He wanted to honor his father's legacy, but he also wanted to leave his mark. He initiated reforms in governance. He overhauled the justice system and made regulations to protect the rights of the people and statesmen. Think, my friends, even in the early days of his reign, Solomon understood that a leader must rule not only by conquest, but also by justice. But Suleiman was not just a justice reformer. His leadership also promised to bring the Ottoman world of culture and art to the peak of its golden age. In his early days, he gathered scholars, artists, and statesmen around him, as if he was sketching a blueprint of the future. He listened to their ideas, engaged in deep conversations with each of them, and demonstrated that a ruler should be a listener, not just a commander. That is why Solomon's years on the throne were the beginning of not only a political and military, but also an intellectual and military awakening. The outcome has been to a large extent what has been predicted for a long time. Of course, my friends, like any new ruler, Suleiman faced on his throne not only supporters, but also opponents. There were intrigues whispering in the depths of the palace, forces plotting rebellion, and eyes that wanted to test Suleiman's mettle. But Suleiman was aware of these plots from the very first days. His patience and intelligence were his strongest weapons against such threats. So, my friends, how did Suleiman's stance in those early days change the fate of the Ottoman Empire? How did his reforms and early actions lay the groundwork for the great victories that followed? Moreover, as a young ruler, how did Suleiman deal with the conspiracies that were being plotted in the dark corners of the palace? For answers to all these questions and more, we continue. My dear friends, the year 1521. Suleiman was no longer just a sultan, but the harbinger of a new era that swept across the Ottoman lands like a storm. After his ascension to the throne, he initiated reforms that would place the Ottoman Empire on strong foundations and showed that he was a mighty ruler who reached beyond the palace walls. However, like every ruler who wants to write his name in golden letters on the stage of history, Suleiman had his eyes set on distant lands. And one of those lands was home to a target that would change the fate of the Ottoman Empire, Belgrade. The Belgrade, dear listeners, was not just a fortress. This strategic point on the Danube River, which held the gates of Europe, stood like a dagger, a threat to the Ottoman heart. For centuries it had been the symbol of Europe's hopes of defeating the Ottomans. The Ottoman sultans had tried many times to capture this important fortress, but Belgrade had remained a symbol of resistance for the Christian world. In Suleiman's eyes, however, Belgrade was not just a fortress, but the key to a victory that would cement Ottoman dominance in Europe. At the head of his army, Suleiman showed himself to be not only a military commander, but also a brilliant strategist. As the Ottoman army marched along the Danube, under Suleiman's command it moved like a flood, sweeping everything before it. Each and every soldier believed in his might and had nothing but victory in their eyes. In the early days of the campaign, the Ottoman navy, advancing on both sides of the Danube, besieged the castle from both land and river. Imagine, my friends, the fear of the Christian soldiers in the Belgrade castle in those days. As the siege continued, the walls of the fortress shook with the roar of the Ottoman cannons, each blow bringing the end of Belgrade closer and closer. The siege demonstrated not only Suleiman's military might, but also his diplomatic acumen. Suleiman had set in motion various alliance plans during this campaign to prevent the Christian world from uniting and putting up a greater resistance against the Ottomans. He created chaos among the European courts and fomented discord among some countries. Thus, as Belgrade fell, a united European intervention became almost impossible. When Belgrade was finally taken under the Ottoman flag, Suleiman had not just won a victory, it was a turning point that strengthened the Ottoman position in Europe and made the Balkans virtually part of Ottoman territory. Belgrade became the Ottoman gateway to Europe, and Ottoman dominance over the Danube was once again consolidated. After capturing the fortress, Suleiman took most of the people of the city under his protection and earned the respect of both the people and his soldiers with his justice. This was another great step towards his title of the Magnificent. However, my dear friends, the echoes of this victory were not only felt in the Ottoman lands. In the palaces of Europe, this conquest had an earthquake effect. From Rome to Vienna, from Paris to Prague, everyone was talking about the power of the new sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But what kind of a wave of fear did this victory create in Europe? And what was Suleiman's next target after Belgrade? That one wave of fear did this victory create in Europe? And what was Suleiman's next target after Belgrade? Was one, but this story's not over yet. The real excitement begins now. My dear friends, Suleiman, who planted the Ottoman banner at the gates of Europe with the Belgrade victory, saw neither the cool flow of the Danube nor the banners waving in the wind of the conquered lands as the end of a goal. No, he was a soldier, a ruler and a dreamer. He was always looking forward, ever forward, for a greater victory, for a more glorious ideal. This ideal would be crowned with a victory that would bring the Ottomans to the very heart of Europe, Mohaç. And Mohaç would be not just a battle, but a turning point that would change the course of history. In 1526, the Ottoman army marched like a giant dragon towards the European lands. The combined armies of the Polish-Hungarian forces were preparing to be a barrier in front of the Ottomans. But behind this barrier was fear, my friends. A fear that was clearly visible. The combined forces of Europe, spooked by the victories of the Ottoman Sultan, were trying to understand who this young sultan was. But for Suleiman, Mohaç was not just a battle, it was a show of strength that would demonstrate the might of the Ottomans to the four corners of Europe. Suleiman was at the head of his army at Mohaç, just as he had been at the siege of Belgrade. But there was a difference at Mohaç. The Sultan was no longer a young sultan, but an experienced commander. Each movement of the Ottoman army was like the lines of a pre-written epic. The advance of the army, the formation of the infantry and cavalry, the strategic placement of the artillery, all these were masterpieces of Ottoman martial art. Sultan Suleiman also made good use of the Hungarian kingdom's weak political structure and internal conflicts. The army of the Hungarian king Lajos II was very weak against the Ottomans, both in terms of numbers and morale. And the great day came, my friends. The plain of Mohaç was the place where two great armies faced each other. The Ottoman army gripped the enemy troops like a claw, with the cavalry on its flanks. The artillery shattered the Hungarian ranks with an effect unprecedented on the European battlefield. The roar of the cannons was powerful enough to silence the flow of the rivers. Imagine, my dear friends, what the enemy soldiers must have felt. Smoke rising all around, crumbling lines, and a plain with nowhere to run. This was not a battle, but a deluge. Lasting only 2 hours, this battle went down in history as one of the fastest and most decisive victories in Ottoman history. When the enemy lines broke, the Hungarian king Lajos II drowned in a swamp as he tried to flee in panic. This was not only the death of a king, but also the end of the Hungarian kingdom. The Battle of Mohaç was a turning point in the fall of the Kingdom of Hungary and the fall of Budin under Ottoman rule. Budin became one of the western strongholds of the Ottoman Empire, while the Hungarian lands became a strategic base for the Ottomans, further opening the gates of Europe. After the victory, the courts of Europe were silent. Neither France, the Holy Roman Empire, nor the papacy expected the Ottomans to win such a great victory in such a short time. Mohaç had become a symbol of Europe's kneeling before the Ottomans. It was not only a military success, but also a diplomatic victory. Europe now had a clearer sense of Ottoman power and recognized Suleiman's reign as one of the greatest in history. But this great victory was only the beginning for Suleiman. After this giant step into Europe, the Sultan set his sights on an even bigger goal. But what new challenges awaited Suleiman after the Mohaç victory? What would be the Ottomans' next move after this victory that completely changed the balance of power in the heart of Europe? Ah, my dear friends, our story does not end here. We have much more to tell, many lands to conquer. In the next installment, I invite you to a brand new adventure. Are you ready? Ah, my dear friends. Last month, the thunder of the Battle of Mohaç was still reverberating through the echoing mountains and rivers of Europe. This extraordinary victory of the Ottoman army had made Suleiman's name a legend not only in the East, but also in the West. But this victory was not the end, but the beginning of a much bigger story. After making Budin a fortress under the Ottoman banner, Sultan Suleiman turned his eyes further afield. At the depths of Europe, this time the target was Vienna, a magnificent walled city in the very heart of Europe, the apple of the eye of the House of Habsburg. Vienna. The year 1529. The Ottoman army was marching towards a goal that no Islamic army had ever reached before. For Suleiman, this campaign was not just a military conquest, but a symbol. Vienna was the gateway to Europe, and knocking on this door was a clear demonstration of the Ottoman will to dominate the entire continent. But my friends, this journey would not be easy. Vienna was different from Mohaç. It was not just a city, but one of the most important defense points in Europe. Thanks to its strong walls and strategic location, the march of the Ottoman army was like the lines of an epic. Thousands of soldiers, mounted troops, huge cannons and banners reflecting the splendor of the army, marched along the Danube. But this time it was a journey from the sweltering heat of summer to the rainy and harsh weather of autumn. Nature seemed to challenge the Ottoman army. Heavy rains along the way turned the soil to mud and slowed the progress of the huge cannons and ammunition carts. But Suleiman and his army did not give up. They were the sons of a nation that had overcome many obstacles throughout history. By the time they reached the walls of Vienna in September, the panic in the city was almost palpable. The Habsburgs were well aware of the splendor and power of the Ottoman army. The garrison of a few thousand men in the city was preparing to put up great resistance to protect Vienna. In the face of the size of the Ottoman army, this resistance seemed like a dim candlelight. However, my dear friends, as in every great victory, the subtle calculations of fate would come into play. As the Ottoman army laid siege to Vienna and prepared to dig tunnels under the walls to blow them up, a series of unexpected problems arose. On the one hand, the harshness of the approaching winter, and on the other, the logistical difficulties the army had faced during this long campaign made things difficult. In addition, the Austrian garrison, despite the superiority of the Ottoman artillery, put up a resistance and put up a death defense behind the walls. The tunnels dug by the Ottoman army to breach the walls began to collapse due to the mud brought by the rains. And of course, as in any great war, disease began to spread through the army, affecting the morale of the soldiers. Vienna presented one of the toughest defenses the Ottomans had ever faced. Sultan Suleiman was at the head of his army throughout the siege, but conditions were becoming increasingly difficult. The gloomy autumn weather, heavy losses, and the strength of the resistance forced the Ottomans to make a strategic decision. It was time to retreat rather than suffer further losses in front of the walls of Vienna. Suleiman, like many great leaders throughout history, knew that sometimes a step back was a precursor to a greater victory in the long run. This failure, my dear friends, did not diminish the power of the Ottomans. On the contrary, it gave Europe a stronger sense of who Suleiman was, because an army that had reached Vienna had sent a message to the very heart of Europe. The Ottomans had no borders. The siege of Vienna marked the beginning of the Ottoman Habsburg struggle and laid the foundations for a rivalry that would last for centuries. Although this campaign ended in failure, the Ottoman influence on Europe and Suleiman's reign, which earned him the title Kanuni, would fill the pages of history with many more campaigns. So, my friends, how did Suleiman the Magnificent proceed after Vienna? How did this defeat shape the Ottoman policies and war strategies in Europe? I will be waiting for you in the next episode to find the answers to these questions. Are you ready? Our adventure is not over here. We have many more stories to tell. My dear friends, a few years had passed since the Ottoman retreat from the gates of Vienna. As a ruler, Sultan Suleiman was looking not only to the west, but also to the east. Because the strength of an empire was measured not only by the lands it conquered, but also by how well it could hold its borders. On the eastern borders of the Ottoman Empire, a great threat was rising under the leadership of the Safavid Shah Tahmasp, who succeeded Shah Ismail, both politically and religiously. The Safavids were challenging the Ottoman dominance in the east. This challenge would lead to one of the longest and bloodiest wars in our history, the Ottoman-Safavid struggle. In the year 1533, Sultan Suleiman completed his preparations for a great campaign. The ongoing Safavid raids on the eastern borders threatened the Ottoman trade routes in the east, and at the same time tried to divide the Ottoman subjects with Shiite propaganda. The Safavids had amassed great power in and around Tabriz and captured strategic cities such as Baghdad. This was a clear challenge not only to Ottoman political supremacy, but also to its authority in the Islamic world. Suleiman could not remain indifferent to this situation. He was not only a sultan, but also the protector of Islam, the sultan of the world. Winning this war would mean restoring not only Ottoman power, but also unity in the Islamic world. The campaign began with great fanfare from Istanbul. Talented viziers like Sukurl Mehmed Pasha were at Suleiman's side, meticulously planning the logistics and strategy of the army. Kanuni's preparations for this campaign were a work of art. Tens of thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, cannons, food and ammunition. This gigantic army was marching towards Tabriz. The discipline of the Ottoman army was deeply admired not only by the Safavids but also by the entire world of that period. In 1534, Tabriz was conquered. My friends, Tabriz, one of the most important Safavid strongholds, a jewel that embodied the richness and culture of the East. With this victory, the Ottoman army not only gained a strategic advantage, but also destroyed the morale of the Safavids. But this was only the beginning. After Tabriz, the next target was Baghdad. This ancient city was not only a strategic center, but also the site of the golden age of Islamic history. The Caliphate had once shone here, and the center of Islamic knowledge and culture had been shaped here. The Baghdad campaign is recorded as one of the greatest military successes in Ottoman history. With this conquest, Suleiman annexed Baghdad, which had been in the hands of the Safavids, to Ottoman territory, thus stabilizing the eastern borders. However, these victories were not easily won. The Safavids challenged the Ottoman army with guerrilla tactics and took advantage of the mountainous geography. But Suleiman's genius, the army's discipline, and the Ottomans' superior strategic planning overcame all these obstacles. The conquest of Baghdad cemented the Ottoman dominance in the east. My dear friends, this struggle was not limited to military victories. In 1555, the Treaty of Amasya defined the borders between the Ottomans and the Safavids and established a truce between the two sides. This treaty put an end to Safavid aggression in the east and formalized Ottoman control of the territories it had gained. Thus, Tabriz, Baghdad, and the surrounding area remained under Ottoman rule. Although the Treaty of Amasya did not bring about a lasting peace between the two great powers, it was an important turning point that consolidated Ottoman dominance in the east. But my dear friends, behind all these victories, one question still lingered. How long would it take for Suleiman to turn his attention back to the west, to Europe? Would the Ottoman army once again challenge the Habsburgs? I will be waiting for you in the next episode to find the answers to these questions. Are you ready? The unique adventure of Ottoman history does not end here, but a new curtain is opening. Ah, my dear friends, the voice of the seas echoed in the Ottoman Empire's glorious journey through history. Suleiman the Magnificent had completed the war against the Safavids in the east and secured the eastern borders of the empire. Now it was time to turn his eyes and power to the seas, because the saga of the Ottoman victory was not only written on land. The waves of the seas were also an important part of this saga. One of the most brilliant stories written on these waves was the naval victory of Preveza, won under the leadership of Barbaros Hayreddin Pasha. If you're ready, let's dive into the exciting story of those stormy years. By 1538, the Mediterranean was witnessing a great power struggle. The Ottomans had begun to establish their dominance in this deep blue sea. However, there was no weak opponent against them. Spain, Venice, the papacy, and other European states had united and formed a holy alliance to put a stop to the Ottoman rise in the seas. The goal of this alliance was not only to undermine Ottoman dominance in the Mediterranean, but also to threaten all the empire's trade routes and destroy its economic and strategic superiority. However, they did not yet realize who the Ottomans were against them, because there was Barbaros Hayreddin Pasha, who carried the Ottoman flag to these seas. Barbaros. This great sailor, known for his red beard, was the conqueror of the Mediterranean, the living legend of the age of pirates. In fact, he had developed the ability to rule the seas from his youth. When Hayreddin Pasha was put in charge of the Ottoman navy, he was not only a commander, but also a leader who understood the spirit of the seas. He restructured the navy, equipped ships with the most advanced techniques, and brought together a division of the ships to fight a single battle. Under his leadership, the Ottoman navy became the most powerful naval power in the Mediterranean. But this was only the beginning, because there was a great victory ahead of them at Preveza. The stage for this great encounter between the Ottoman navy and the Holy Alliance was set in the waters of Preveza off the coast of Greece. Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha was both a master of strategy and a brave warrior. The Holy Alliance fleet was led by the famous Andrea Doria, but Doria was opposed by Barbarossa's foresight and naval genius. When the battle began, the fast and agile ships of the Ottoman fleet mocked the heavy and cumbersome nature of the European ships. On Barbarossa's orders, the Ottoman navy attacked the enemy with sudden maneuvers. The roar of the Ottoman cannons turned the sea into a battlefield. The Battle of Preveza was not just a battle, it was a work of art. Barbarossa had so skillfully predicted the movements of the enemy's ships and positioned his fleet so perfectly that the winds of victory began to blow in favor of the Ottomans even before the battle began. This fierce battle, which lasted for 3 days, was engraved in Ottoman history in golden letters. The enemy navy was shattered, and the pride of the Holy Alliance was shaken. The Mediterranean had now become the Ottomans' inland sea. This victory not only reinforced the Ottomans' superiority in the seas, but also demonstrated once again the helplessness of Europe against the Ottomans. My dear friends, after the victory of Preveza, the Ottomans became not only a military power in the Mediterranean, but also a giant of maritime trade. The role of Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha in this victory is a turning point not only in Ottoman history, but also in world maritime history. When Hayreddin Pasha returned to Suleiman with a great ceremony, with this victory the Ottoman power at sea was now indisputably assured. But, my friends, every victory brings with it new questions. Would the Ottomans be able to maintain this naval supremacy? What kind of challenges would the stormy waters of the Mediterranean be the scene of in the future? And after Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha, would the Ottoman Navy be able to preserve his legacy? In the next episode, we will dive into this unique adventure together. Are you ready? History is waiting for us. My friends, within the magnificent walls of the Ottoman palace, there rises a story of a woman who changed not only the fate of a person, but even the fate of an entire state. The heroine of this story is a woman, popularly known as Hürrem Sultan, who was uprooted from the land of her birth, and by a twist of fate, settled at the center of the most powerful empire in the world. Her rise became a legend that overflowed from the palace and changed the course of the state and even history, its impact lasting to this day. The year is the early 1520s, as the Ottoman Empire was preparing to experience its golden age under the mighty leadership of Suleiman the Magnificent. The light of a woman was shining in the mysterious and closed world of the palace. When she was brought to the palace as a slave, Hürrem Sultan was destined for neither a throne nor a crown, but with her intelligence, unique charm, and most importantly, a keen sense of strategy, she stood out from the other women in the palace. This young woman, who attracted the attention of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, soon went from being just a concubine to being the only one who won the Sultan's heart. So, what made Hürrem different from the others? Perhaps her biggest secret was that she abandoned the perspective of a slave and felt that she belonged to the Ottoman dynasty. Once she succeeded in becoming Suleiman's favorite, she did not hesitate to boldly question the traditions and rules within the palace. So much so that a concubine becoming the Sultan's official wife through marriage was unprecedented in Ottoman history. Hürrem succeeded in this too. Not only her place in Kanuni's heart, but also her position in the palace hierarchy had changed. This rise opened not only the doors of the harem, but also a path to the administrative layers of the state. My dear friends, the rise of Hürrem Sultan was not only the personal triumph of a woman, it was also the beginning of the emergence of the Ottoman court, the harem as a center of power, Until then, the harem had mostly been seen as a space for the sultan's family, completely cut off from the outside world. But Hurrem Sultan turned this quiet and mysterious structure into a kind of political laboratory. Thanks to her, the harem became a place where decisions were made that shaped the future of not only the sultan's family but also the empire. With her strong influence over the sultan, she had a say not only in Suleiman's decisions, but also in many other matters, from foreign policy to domestic affairs. This, of course, led to increased jealousies and rivalries within the court, which included and especially affected foreign policies. Hurrem describes Hurrem the Ulu Charam, the Oibao violence, and Hurrem responded to these tragedies in the palace, but this success was not without a price, because these growing power conflicts within the palace paved the way for many future tragedies in the Ottoman dynasty. Hurrem Sultan's influence was not limited to the palace. No, my dear friends, her name echoed from the streets of Istanbul to the royal courts of Europe. Suleiman's relationship with her was written about with admiration and even a little jealousy by many European historians of the time. An envoy from Vienna, for example, described her as the most influential woman in the empire, and wrote that her intelligence added to the Ottoman power. Hurrem Sultan's traces were seen not only on the palace walls, but also in charitable works and architectural projects. The charities, mosques, and fountains added to the Süleymaniye complex immortalized her name in the hearts of the people. But let us not forget that with every great power comes great enmity. Hurrem Sultan's influence on some of Kanuni's political decisions caused great controversy, especially during the struggle for the throne. Her strategic maneuvering paved the way for the death of Şehzade Mustafa, perhaps one of the greatest tragedies of the Ottoman Empire in the years to come. Hurrem Sultan's rise in the court and her influence on the state was, of course, not the end of our story, but only the beginning, because her power at court also sparked a great struggle between the heirs to the throne. So, what happened during this struggle for the throne? How did the tragic end of Şehzade Mustafa, the apple of the Ottoman eye, affect the fate of the state? Let's discover the answers to these questions together in the next episode. Yes, my friends, get ready to step into one of the most turbulent periods of Ottoman history. Oh, my friends, if you only knew what intrigues and dramas took place behind the glorious curtains that floated in the magnificent palaces of the Ottoman Empire. The struggles for the throne that grew in the shadow of this splendor left deep wounds that shaped not only the fate of the Ottoman dynasty, but also the future of an empire. I will now tell you one of the most tragic stories of this turbulent period, the fate of Prince Mustafa, but not without a thorough understanding of the causes and consequences of these events. Let us analyze together this drama that echoes in the silent walls of the palace. Suleiman the Magnificent, a monarch who sat on the Ottoman throne as a symbol of justice and might. But unfortunately, even during his reign, there were more storms than peace in the corridors of the palace. The biggest source of these storms was the struggle for the throne. The rivalry between the Sultan's sons set the stage for some of the most tragic events in Ottoman history, because in the Ottoman Empire, the throne was not passed down according to tradition or order of greatness. The prince who gained power and was deemed most qualified in the eyes of his father ascended the throne. However, this tradition also brought with it heartbreaking events such as fratricide. Suleiman's eldest son, Prince Mustafa, was very popular among the people and soldiers. With his courage, wisdom, and closeness to his people, everyone was certain that he would one day sit on the throne. However, as fate weaves its webs, it is not always the strongest who is struck, but the one who's played the most. The struggle for the throne had also begun among Mustafa's siblings, especially Hürrem Sultan's sons, especially Şehzad Selim and Şehzad Bayezid, were very ambitious against Mustafa in this struggle. Selim and Bayezid, acting with the support of their mother, did not hesitate to play all kinds of games to discredit Mustafa in the eyes of their father. Ah, dear viewers, this story would be incomplete without mentioning the intelligence and strategic power of Hürrem Sultan. Hürrem never missed an opportunity for her sons to ascend the throne. Her greatest ally in this process was Rustem Pasha, the mighty vizier of the palace. Rustem Pasha sowed seeds of suspicion in Kanuni about Prince Mustafa. He told him that Mustafa was secretly corresponding with the Shah of Iran and that he had ambitions of becoming sultan. You know, even in the face of suspicions, Kanuni's sense of justice was quite harsh, so much so that this news created a deep suspicion in Kanuni's heart. But these intrigues, which seemed to be the betrayal of Mustafa, caused him to take the heaviest decision ever made by a sultan with the heart of a father. The events that took place in the camp on the Konya Plain in 1553 left deep traces, not only in Ottoman history, but also in human history. When Prince Mustafa was summoned to the camp by his father's order, he still had loyalty and respect for his father in his heart. However, this loyalty was his undoing. Entering the Sultan's tent, Mustafa was strangled by the prepared executioners. The cries that rose from the tent at that moment were engraved in history as the moment when not only Mustafa, but also the conscience of the Ottoman Empire was silenced. A great wave of anger and mourning spread among the people. The soldiers and the people thought that Hürrem Sultan and Rustem Pasha were responsible for the death of Prince Mustafa, not Kanuni. Kanuni, perhaps for the rest of his life, carried the burden of this decision and was consumed with remorse, because sending his son to his death with his own hands was a weight that was hard to bear even for a sultan. Mustafa's death created a breaking point on the Ottoman throne and in the eyes of the people. After this event, the peaceful climate of the Ottoman Empire was shattered, never to return. But, my dear friends, Mustafa's tragic end was only the beginning, because the struggle for the throne did not end there. On the contrary, it became even more complicated. The rivalry between Hürrem Sultan's sons, Selim and Bayezid, turned into one of the bloodiest sibling struggles in Ottoman history. So, who emerged victorious in the struggle? Which ways did the brothers resort to in order to seize the Ottoman throne? And how did all this turmoil affect the future of the empire? Get ready, because this story is just beginning. Ah, my dear viewers, I will now take you back to the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, an age when the greatness of the Ottoman Empire was talked about all over the world. Its seals were read on trade routes, domes soared to the skies, and science and art adorned the head of the nation like a golden crown. This was the period when not only an empire, but also a civilization reached its peak. However, this splendor was reflected not only in the gold-embroidered curtains of the palace, but also in the daily lives of the people, in the brushstrokes of the artists, and in the books of the scholars. Let's discover the splendor of this golden age together. Suleiman the Magnificent made history not only with his conquests, but also with the steps he took to protect and increase the prosperity of the Ottoman lands. As the empire's borders expanded, the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean and the golden dust of the Silk Road flowed into the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul became a trade center at the intersection of East and West, and the empire's ports were flooded with merchants from Venice, Genoa, and even the Indian Ocean. The commercial ties established with the Western world, especially through capitulations, gave the Ottomans a great economic advantage. While French merchants could trade tax-free in Ottoman ports, the Ottomans used the income from this trade to increase the welfare of the people and build madrasas and mosques. Of course, this prosperity was not limited to trade. Agricultural products grew in abundance in the fertile lands of Anatolia, and many products from wheat to silk adorned the Ottoman markets. Ah, the foundations, those sacred institutions that shaped the spirit of Ottoman society, fed the poor, clothed the orphan, and financed centers of learning. Suleiman the Magnificent attached great importance to the strengthening of foundations, so much so that he was not just sultan, he was almost like the father of the people. Foundations, mosques, caravanserais, and baths both protected the social structure of society and supported the economic order. Foundations named after Hürrem Sultan, the wife of Kanuni, established soup kitchens for the poor and opened educational centers for women and children. This social network, stretching from Istanbul to Baghdad, demonstrated that the Ottomans were not only a military power, but also a civilization. Yes, my friends, if the era of the Magnificent was a song, the most glorious chorus of this song would be written by Mimar Sinan. Sinan the architect was not only the architect of the Ottoman Empire, but also its soul. The majestic domes of the Süleymaniye Mosque were like a nation's prayer to the sky. This masterpiece, built at the request of the Magnificent, was not only a place of worship, but also a symbol of the Ottoman love of science and art. Mimar Sinan was not satisfied with Süleymaniye. He took Ottoman architecture to a new peak by building the Süleymaniye Mosque in Edirne. He transformed Anatolia into a work of art with not only mosques, but also bridges, caravanserais, and baths. By placing every stone, every column with great skill and love, he brought the Ottoman spirit together with Europa. However, the golden age of the Ottoman Empire was enlightened not only by art, but also by science. Madrasas rose like the Ottoman fortresses of knowledge, and the scholars trained here made great advances in fields such as medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. The new madrasas, opened with the support of Kanuni, became a popular destination for scholars from both the Islamic world and Europe. Especially under the influence of Ebussuud Efendi, the Ottoman education system was reformed and made more organized and comprehensive. Important studies were carried out in the field of medicine, and Ibn Sina's works became a bedside book in Ottoman madrasas. The scientists of the time made great contributions to the intellectual life of the Ottoman Empire, making the Kanuni period not only an era of conquests, but also a period of wisdom. But my dear viewers, where there is splendor, there is not always peace, is there? So, what happened in the shadow of this golden age? How did the Ottoman empires rise to the top? The enemies it left behind, the rebellions that threatened domestic tranquility, and the whispers that echoed in the palace corridors affected splendor. And of course, how did this glorious period come to an end? Get ready, because the secrets of history are not over yet. My dear viewers, the might of the Ottoman Empire was shaped not only by the flash of swords, but also by the touch of intelligence, diplomacy, and subtle calculations. For a ruler like Suleiman the Magnificent, victory on the battlefield was as important as victory at the diplomatic table. And one of the most remarkable of these victories was the Ottoman alliance with France. Let's open this interesting page of history together and take a journey through the Ottomans' clever moves in European politics. The first half of the 16th century was a period of turmoil for Europe. On the one hand, the power flexing of the Holy Roman Empire. On the other, the religious turmoil caused by the Protestant Reformation. This European turmoil was a sea of opportunities that a genius like Suleiman the Magnificent could use brilliantly. At the time, while the Ottoman Empire was eliminating its enemies in the East, it was also taking steps to change the balance of power in Europe. In the heart of Europe, the King of France, Francois I, was under pressure from the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, Charlemagne. Charlemagne's power was growing, and he was on his way to becoming the greatest ruler in Europe. However, this situation disturbed not only France, but also the Ottomans. Charlemagne's rise could trigger the unification of Europe against the Ottomans. It was precisely at this point that diplomacy came into play. When King Francis of France needed Ottoman help to counter Charlemagne, Suleiman the Magnificent found a perfect way to turn Europe's turmoil in his favor. Francis had been defeated and captured at the Battle of Pavia against Charlemagne. At that moment, France's hopes were pinned on help from the east, from the Ottoman court. Francis's mother wrote a letter asking Kanuni to rescue her son. My dear friends, this letter was not only a call for help, but also an acknowledgement of the Ottoman influence in European politics. The Magnificent handled the situation with great delicacy. He threatened Charlemagne and secured the release of Francis, and thus the Ottomans laid the foundations of an alliance with France that would become the hallmark of European politics. In order to strengthen this alliance with France, Suleiman the Magnificent did not only rely on military support. Economic and commercial relations were also an important part of this alliance. In 1536, the Ottoman-French capitulations came into force. With this agreement, French merchants were granted wide commercial privileges in Ottoman ports. However, it should not be forgotten that this was not only in France's interest. Through these agreements, the Ottomans strengthened their economic ties with the Western world and increased the prosperity of the empire with the income from trade. This relationship with France also had a great impact on other European states. England, Venice, and even Spain lined up to make similar agreements with the Ottomans. The art of Kanuni's diplomacy was not limited to France, but created a roadmap for all of Europe to recognize and work in harmony with the Ottoman Empire. Kanuni's art of diplomacy. It was not only about showing the power of a ruler, but also about shaping the future of a nation. This alliance with France further increased the Ottoman power in European politics. Being able to stand against a ruler like Charlemagne brought the Ottoman prestige in Europe to its peak. However, Kanuni's diplomatic genius did not end there. Not only did he win France as an ally, but he also managed to divide Europe in a way that served Ottoman interests. But my friends, there are greater secrets hidden in the dust of history. What were the long-term effects of this alliance on the Ottoman Empire? And how did the world that Kanuni shaped with such clever moves change in his wake? Was the Ottoman web of diplomacy enough to carry the empire forever? We will look for the answers to these questions together. Get ready, there are many more stories waiting for us between the pages of history. Dear viewers, this long journey we call life, no matter how great our victories, one day leads us all to an inevitable end. But there are some people whose end is not just a death, but the closing of an era. The last moments of Suleiman the Magnificent's life bear witness to such a history. The Zigedvar expedition, a ruler's determination, power, and finally his farewell. Let's take a look at this last great campaign, these dramatic pages that have earned an unforgettable place on the stage of history. By 1566, Suleiman the Magnificent was 72 years old. He had been on the Ottoman throne for almost half a century and had won countless victories both in the east and the west. However, despite his advanced age, the passion for conquest had by no means diminished. After the previous campaigns against Austria, Zigedvar Castle, one of the last points of resistance in Hungarian territory, had still not fallen. It was one of the last major obstacles to the Ottoman advance in Central Europe. But this campaign had not only strategic, but also symbolic significance. Suleiman the Magnificent had brought the glory and power of the Ottoman Empire to its peak during his reign. Zigedvar could have been the ruler's last victory. Dreams left unfinished during the earlier siege of Vienna would perhaps be rekindled by the fall of Zigedvar. Kanuni was organizing this campaign not only to expand Ottoman territory, but also to demonstrate once again the empire's influence over the West. The Magnificent was now old and sick. Rheumatic pains, the difficulties of advancing age, and occasional health problems made every step more difficult for him. However, this great ruler did not accept any hesitation. As the army set out from Istanbul and headed towards Hungarian lands under the leadership of Kanuni, everyone knew that this campaign would be a turning point in Ottoman history. It is said that during the campaign, Kanuni spent long hours in his tent, consulting with his viziers and keeping his army in good spirits and discipline. It sends shivers down one's spine to think what an example of both leadership and perseverance a ruler can set, doesn't it? The Magnificent never showed his fatigue when he was cheering up his troops. He was still the invincible Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Zigedvar Castle was one of Austria's most important defense points. Its commander, Miklos Zrinyi, had become a symbol of resistance against the Ottomans. the siege would not be easy for Kanuni's army. The castle challenged the Ottoman army with its strong defenses and the spirit of resistance. However, as always, the Ottomans' determination and technical superiority proved decisive in this battle. Throughout the siege, the cannons fired incessantly, and the Ottoman army continued to push the castle walls. However, during the siege of Siegedvar, Kanuni's health deteriorated. As the Ottoman army came closer to breaching the castle walls, another battle was taking place in the Suleiman's tent. The silent battle of a monarch standing on the thin line between life and death. Legends always describe the last moments of Suleiman the Magnificent with sadness. In the most critical days of the siege of Siegedvar, the Sultan was too weak to rise from his bed, but he still wanted to see his army triumph until his last breath. The Sultan's death was kept in great secrecy in order not to demoralize the enemy. Instead of announcing his death to the soldiers, the Vizier-i-Azam Sokulu Mehmed Pasha announced that his orders were still in force. The death of the Magnificent took place just before the fall of Siegedvar. Against all odds, the Ottoman army captured the fortress, and thus the last campaign of the Magnificent was crowned with victory. But far from being a sweet victory, it was the empire's farewell to an era. The Siegedvar campaign was not only a military victory, but also the end of an era. Suleiman the Magnificent had sat on the Ottoman throne for 46 years and built the empire into one of the most powerful states in Europe. Siegedvar was a final testament to his determination, leadership, and mastery of statecraft. But this victory also had a profound impact on the future of the Ottoman Empire. With the death of Suleiman the Magnificent, a new era began for the Ottoman Empire, one shaped by different challenges. So, dear viewers, what was the path of the Ottoman Empire after this glorious period that ended with the Siegedvar campaign? How did the rulers who succeeded Kanuni take over his legacy? And what were the effects of this great victory on the future of the Ottoman Empire? We will discover the answers to all these questions together. Get ready. History will whisper many more stories to us. My dear viewers, it would be a great mistake to judge a ruler only by his victories, the lands he conquered, or the great monuments he built. The real power of a ruler is measured by the place he holds in the hearts of his people and how he balances the scales of justice. This is exactly what distinguished Suleiman the Magnificent from others. He was not just a conqueror, he was justice itself. His legal reforms, one of the most important reforms in Ottoman history, earned him the nickname Kanuni and made him a symbol of justice for centuries to come. Let's dive deeper into these great reforms and discover together why Kanuni is remembered as such in history. When Suleiman the Magnificent ascended the throne, the Ottoman Empire already had a strong state structure. However, Kanuni wanted to further consolidate this structure and ensure that justice was administered equally in every corner of the empire. In his understanding of governance, justice was the greatest responsibility of a ruler. Therefore, as his first order of business, he reviewed the Ottoman legal system and initiated a comprehensive reform movement to overcome the deficiencies. The social structure of the period was extremely complex. The Ottoman Empire was home to people from different religions, languages, and cultures. To govern such a diverse society fairly, strong, clear, and understandable laws were needed. It was precisely out of this need that Kanuni's legal reforms were born. First of all, a flexible but robust legal system was created that took into account the local problems of each province. This not only ensured peace among Ottoman citizens, but also reinforced the authority of the state. The laws enacted during the reign of Kanuni, on the one hand, adhered to the provisions of Sharia law, and on the other hand, included new regulations in line with the needs of the state. It was extremely difficult to strike this balance, but Kanuni and the great statesmen of the period successfully accomplished this difficult task. For example, new laws were enacted in many areas, from land regulations to the tax system. The fief system was made more efficient. The tax burden of the people was balanced, and judicial processes were made more transparent. Kanuni's biggest assistant during these reforms was Ebussuud Efendi, one of the most important jurists in Ottoman history. Ebussuud Efendi's fatwas and Kanuni's orders came together to revolutionize the Ottoman legal system, making justice not just an ideal, but a part of daily life. So, where did the nickname Kanuni come from? Suleiman the Magnificent was given this title not only because he was a legislator, but also because he made justice a way of life. Among the people, his name became synonymous with righteousness and equality. It is said that even in a case where an ordinary citizen was seeking his rights, the Magnificent would act without giving any privileges to anyone. When the Sultan's name was mentioned in the courts, a wave of tranquility would spread among the people, because everyone knew that the scales of justice of the Magnificent were never infallible. Another legend is related to his Justisnamas. According to the rumor, Kanuni would personally listen to complaints from administrators all over the country and take decisions based on these complaints. This approach showed that he was not only a ruler, but also a protector of his people. Kanuni's legal reforms were influential not only in his own time, but also in the following centuries of the Ottoman Empire. His laws formed the basis of the Ottoman justice system for a long time. More importantly, these reforms played a major role in the empire's ability to hold together peoples of different nationalities and cultures. Kanuni's sense of justice made the multicultural nature of the Ottoman Empire an advantage. Here, dear viewers, we have taken a look behind the scenes of the reforms that earned Suleiman the Magnificent the nickname the Magnificent. But as well as seeing how the scales of justice were tipped, it is also important to know how his decisions reflected on the political power of the Ottoman Empire. How did Kanuni's diplomatic acumen and successes in the art of diplomacy expand the borders of this great state? And how did these achievements change Europe's view of the Ottoman Empire? My dear friends, when we take a look at human history, in every great empire, a moment of peak followed by an inevitable pause, a slowdown. It is almost a law of nature. However, this slowdown does not always mean a loss of power or collapse. Sometimes it happens because the legacy of that peak period sustains the state for a while longer. The Ottoman Empire, following Suleiman the Magnificent, was on the verge of such a period. Today, we will explore the legacy of this great ruler and the journey the Ottoman Empire took in his wake. Suleiman's death, despite the victorious conclusion of the Zigetvar campaign, left a deep void in the Ottoman Empire. For Suleiman was not only a ruler, but also a leader who shaped the Ottoman political and cultural horizon. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire had upset the political balance of Europe and won tremendous victories in the East and West. However, the inevitable challenges that followed every leader also manifested themselves here. So what were these challenges? Selim II, who succeeded Kanuni, was not seen as a warrior or a strong leader like his father, popularly known as Selim the Yellow. He was more known for his calm and peaceful style of rule. However, it was not easy to carry the weight of the huge legacy left by Kanuni. The borders of the state had expanded so much that it became a burden for administration and defense. In particular, border conflicts with the Safavids in the east and the Habsburgs in the west kept the Ottomans on constant alert. Moreover, the rapid development of science and technology in Europe under the influence of the Renaissance and the Reformation movements began to weaken the Ottoman Empire in terms of competition. The Ottoman Navy, which had been a great power during the reign of Kanuni, was shaken by the heavy defeat it suffered in the Battle of Inebasti during the reign of Selim II. This was a sign that the Ottoman supremacy at sea was slowly coming to an end. However, my friends, the legacy of Suleiman the Magnificent cannot be measured only by victories and conquests. The social order, cultural enrichment, and legal reforms created during his reign were the most important elements that shaped the next centuries of the Ottoman Empire. Kanuni's identity as the lawgiver was recognized as a guiding guide not only during his reign, but also in the rule of the sultans who came after him. Imagine how gratefully the people sitting in the shadow of the Süleymaniye Mosque, built by Kanuni, remembered the legacy of this great leader, the guardian of justice and order, the rule of law, reinforced by the fatwas of Ebussuud Efendi, created confidence and peace in every layer of Ottoman society. This is why the reign of the Magnificent was not only a pinnacle, but also an example, an ideal in the land of an extremely literalist and often anti-Semitic part of the world of the 18th century. My dear friends, as important as it is for an empire to reach its peak, it is also important to accept the slowdown that follows this peak. During the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire had the power to challenge the world. But in the periods following Suleiman, this power was gradually replaced by a defensive reflex. The size of the state was becoming more of a burden than an advantage. The protection of each border, the suppression of internal rebellions, and the keeping of different nationalities together began to strain the state. But this stagnation did not immediately turn into a collapse, thanks to the cultural and economic legacy created under Suleiman, the strong infrastructure and established order that Suleiman left behind ensured that the empire would survive for a long time to come. The Ottomans were no longer focused on conquest, but on defending their existing territories and maintaining internal order. Today, when we look back at the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, we can easily say that he was one of the greatest rulers not only of the Ottoman Empire, but also of world history. His leadership gave the Ottoman Empire a golden age and left its mark on history, not only in terms of the extent of its territory, but also in terms of its culture, justice, and the trust it offered to its people. However, as with every great leader, the legacy of the Magnificent has not withstood the corrosive effects of time. Dear viewers, as we conclude this unique story of Suleiman the Magnificent, we are reminded once again of the profound legacy he left for the Ottoman Empire. But the course of history always raises a question. Why did the problems faced by this great empire in the post-Suleiman era lead to even greater crises? And after the Ottoman Empire's long rise, how did the period of stagnation herald its downfall? The answers to these questions will be waiting for you on another page of history.